Hello and welcome everybody to J.R. Willis, postcard artist and entrepreneur with Joe Sabatini. It is my pleasure to introduce Joe in just a minute, but first I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Rose Eason, director of Gallup Arts, and I wanted to explain that this today's virtual talk is part of our ongoing project called Gallup New Deal Art. The Gallup New Deal Art Project is an effort to create a virtual art museum that unifies and that makes fully publicly accessible all of Gallup and McKinley County's artwork from the New Deal era in the 1930s and 40s. And the project is also an effort to showcase the artistic, cultural, and historical significance of those artworks through scholarship, and other creative means. The project is funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it is currently in the prototyping stage. So today's talk is part of that project, and we're doing it in partnership with the Octavia Philin Public Library, so we thank OFPL for its support as well. Gallup and McKinley County has a really impressive collection of New Deal artwork, over 150 objects, everything from paintings to murals to prints to sculpture to furniture to buildings. It's housed across 6 locations in town. It's under the purview of 3 separate entities. The city has some, and most of its holdings are on view at the Octavia Philin Public Library. The county has some artworks, and most of its holdings are on view at the historic courthouse. And then there are a few paintings in the Gallup McKinley County schools, including 6 very large mural-sized paintings by J.R. Willis, which depict the history of the Southwest and are still hanging in the Gallup High School library. J.R. Willis was a well-known and active artist in the early 20th century, and no one knows more about him than Joe Sabatini, who is a librarian and local historian. Joe had a 42-year career as a professional librarian, having obtained his master's degree in library science from UCLA in 1965. He came to New Mexico as a VISTA volunteer working in Sandoval County. Following 5 years at the UNM School of Law Library, he joined the Albuquerque Public Library in 1973 as head of reference. He served as main library manager from 1980 to July of 2000, when he became the library manager at Special Collections, the regional history and genealogy branch. Following his retirement in December 2008, he volunteers in the archives and library of the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center and is active in the Near North Valley Neighborhood Association. I think he's also a member of the Albuquerque Historical Society. So we're so excited to have Joe here today because he has spent several years researching very much in depth J.R. Willis's life and career. And he'll talk today about how Willis made his way as an arts entrepreneur here in Gallup and also in Albuquerque, and how the images he produced both perpetuated and helped shape kind of stereotypical perceptions of the Southwest and its indigenous cultures in particular. J.R. Willis is a very, very compelling figure, also sometimes a problematic figure, and Joe is going to demonstrate that for us today. So with that, I'll thank everyone again for being here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the Facebook comments, and please take it away, Joe.
Okay, I'll get the screen share going here. Let me know if we're all set to go.
You're good.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Rose. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish I was there in person, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to share this. This is a talk that just growed. It started out as a program at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center where I volunteered. They were celebrating their 45th anniversary and wanted to show about why they needed a cultural center to represent Pueblo peoples. And I came up with a part of it about the image of New Mexico Indians in that obliged the Pueblos to take back their own narrative. That grew into a talk called Olla Bearers and Indian Detours, which is New Mexico Indians as tourist attractions. I've given that a number of times as well. But in that talk, one of the major figures is J.R. Willis, because he, in his career, published hundreds of postcards about the Southwest. And so you'll see my appreciation to the people who have helped me on this talk. I got involved in postcards through Nancy Tucker, who is a benefactress of Albuquerque history and a collector of Albuquerque postcards. And we got involved in the city's tricentennial project
Joe,
with a postcard history. Yes.
can you change your screen to presenter view?
So let's think about the arts business. In Albuquerque, for 35 years, we had an art gallery run by Marianne Weems, whose store, she sold her own art and other people's art. And every year in November, she would have the Weems Art Fest, which was the harbinger of the holiday season. She recently retired, but that's very similar to Willis, as we will see. J.R. Willis was a prolific, productive, and proficient artist. You will remember Bob Ross and the Joy of Paintings, where seemingly in half an hour, he could turn a blank canvas into a painting of a mountain lake surrounded by happy trees. And he did more than 1,000 of them. Willis also, his output numbers in the thousands on paintings, as well as his hundreds of postcards. Many of you have been to the New Mexico State Fair. If you go to the State Fair Art Gallery, inevitably there will be a couple of paintings each year that will show the adobe hacienda, this classic rural New Mexico fantasia where the cottonwoods or the aspens are turned yellow, and the mountains in the background, and the adobe hacienda with ristras of red chili and hollyhocks and maybe other elements that just say, this is New Mexico. This is the State Fair painting. Willis was proficient in that. He was known in his time as New Mexico's Aspen King. Here is an oil painting in the Casas de Sueños Old Town Historic Inn, which is in the home that he built. He was described in a new article in New Mexico Magazine as a soldier of fortune in the arts, for he has been reporter, actor, cartoonist, illustrator, painter of easel paintings, as well as murals. And in fact, he had incredible diversity of activities that he had. This list of the kinds of paintings he did, the kind of photographs he did, that he was an illustrator, and that he was a vaudeville performer. And when he gets to Gallup and registers for the draft, he's listed as a motion picture theater projector operator. So he did a lot of things. He was entrepreneurial enough to move around and go in and out of things that were profitable, and had a very prosperous life. And he was all over the place. He traveled. This map shows locations where we know he was, or a few of them where he had exhibits. Um, and his salesmanship included, as I said, this annual open house and sale that was a big social event in Albuquerque in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But you can see in this, installments may be arranged. See the painting in your home. So you could buy a piece of art on payment plan, put it up on your wall, decide you didn't like it, and take it back to him and exchange it for another of similar value. And so he was versatile and was well, he showed himself. He didn't hide his flower. He didn't hide his personality. There's an article in the let me go back to that. An article in 1987 in the journal by Bart Ripp says, if you saw J.R. Willis strolling on Central Avenue, even if you didn't know him, one word would instantly surface: artist. J.R. Willis was a slim gent with a small mustache. He wore capes. He twirled canes. He smoked Pall Malls in an ivory holder. The photographer Walter Hauseman recalled, an egotistical but not overbearing man. Willis was entirely self-confident. He made an art of flakiness. J.R. Willis was born in Sylvania, Georgia on November 24th, 1876. That's right on the South Carolina line between Augusta and Savannah. So his mother, who was a native of Sylvania, got to experience the horrors of Sherman's march to the sea, going straight through their town on the way to Savannah. His father came from the Tampa, Florida area. Willis was the oldest of 12 children of Thomas and Susanna Willis. 8 of those children lived to adulthood, and later on, some of his family migrated to Florida, some of them to the Miami area, which gave him an opportunity to visit them. One of the things I theorize is he didn't like the cold weather, and so he typically wintered, and often in Miami. He would take a month off and visit his relatives there. His art inclination showed early that when he was 6, he won a contest in his school for drawings he made on a slate with crayons, and he was awarded a box of crayons in the first grade. Started out his art career. By 1899, he marries a lady from Sylvania named Temperance Easterling. And in the next decade, they have 3 children, a boy, Datos, in 1901, Louise in 1904, and Emily in 1906. And he first gets jobs doing illustrations for Atlanta newspapers as a to illustrate scenes from the Spanish-American War. And then he also does editorial cartoons for them. He gets jobs illustrating fashion for department stores in advertisements in those newspapers. Then he gets the opportunity to go to New York City to go to an art school, and he also works at McGraw-Hill. It's not McGraw Publishing Company, later McGraw-Hill. So here we are with the 1910 census. I love the census, this snapshot of America, this intimate view of what you were doing in late April of 1910. And so the census enumerator comes to the Willis home in Atlanta, and Mrs. Willis gives the facts about the family, and notes that Mr. Willis is a vaudeville performer, a theatrical performer. He's on the road right now, and there they are, as the family. But incredibly, never seen this before, he's enumerated again. This time, he is in Fresno, California, in a boarding house. On tour, he reports himself as a theater performer, and he also reports himself as single, because he has in fact abandoned his marriage and has taken up with a fellow vaudeville performer whose stage name was Fanny Miles, who's actually, her actual name is Violet Powell. She's born of a British father and an American mother in London, Ontario, Canada, and wound up in vaudeville in Vancouver. So we have them in the Pacific Northwest, and recently, thanks to Nancy Tucker in her pursuit of postcards on eBay, she gets these postcards, Willis doing stage sets or theatrical sets for vaudeville theaters. He's painting the backdrops, the stage backdrops. And if you'll remember the movie Singing in the Rain, Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor do a number called Fit as a Fiddle, where they dance in front of a painted stage with these advertisements from the local businesses. This is in Kalama, Washington, which is between Vancouver and Longview on the Columbia River. And then he shows up again in the Washington State birth records, and you can't hardly see it down here, but there he is. They have a child who is not named in the birth records, but they named Burl. This is December 20th, 1911. Burl's nickname is Dottie. So his wife moves to Knoxville after a very tough time trying to survive as a seamstress with 3 children. Divorces JR in 1913 and marries a man named J.D. Lytle, who's a widower with 5 children who owns a grocery store. So that, these theatrical performers, what can you do? So they continue to participate in vaudeville, and he gets odd jobs. He gets to Los Angeles and starts painting these stage sets for movie production companies. But he's also still traveling the vaudeville circuit, which is, I suspect, how he got to Gordon, Nebraska to do this drawing of a Lakota man named Kills Enemy After Dark. And he would make this as a print and sell this print for the rest of his life. He also gets into animation. Remember, this is the year, it's 10 years before Walt Disney does Mickey Mouse as Steamboat Willie, but you have this Katzenjammer Kids or Gertie the Dinosaur, these famous early animated cartoons. Well, Willis does a cartoon of a character he calls Rastus Afraid of Nothing. This grotesque minstrel show representation of Black people, and all of the characteristics that Southern whites attribute to Black people anywhere are in this illustration. And the animation that you see is him being chased by the dog for stealing apples from somebody's tree. He proposes to syndicate this, a comic strip, and is on his way to New York, or is organizing to go to New York to work on the syndication. And sorry. So he gets on the train, but somebody says, hey, if you got off at Holbrook, the Hopis are doing the snake dance. You could check that out. So he goes, and then he doesn't go to New York. He is enchanted by the Southwest, a bad case of enchantment. I say he got snake bit and got a bad case of enchantment. So he just loves this environment and goes to Hopi, and it's another country. And this is something I could draw and paint. And this postcard names a Hopi village that nobody that I can see, and no reference book that I use, there's no correspondence between what he has written and anything in the Hopi geography. But he made a postcard of it, which he sold. So now we have him in Gallup. One story that I heard was that the man who owned the camera store in Gallup dies of the Spanish flu, and he buys the store. And so he comes to be a citizen of Gallup. In 1920, McKinley County has 13,700 people, 4,000 of whom are in Gallup, and another 1,000 at Gamerco, the Gallup American Coal Company's company town. So Gallup is a tough little city with railroaders and lumberjacks, cowboys and Indians, the Navajo, Zuni, and a Laguna railway worker colony. And he gets into business and fits right in. This the draft registration. We have a physical description of his gray eyes and brown hair and 158 pounds and 5'11". So we know physically what he looks like. And at this point, he's listed as the camera operator, and his wife is there as well. So, and of course, the coal company, American coal companies had the practice of importing young men from Europe, from different parts of Europe, some of whom did not love each other, Greeks and Italians, Serbians and Austrians, and these people who had fought against each other in World War I. That kind of tends to discourage those guys getting together to unionize. So anyway, for a town of 4,000 or 5,000 people, Gallup is remarkably cosmopolitan. And again, by 1920, the census shows Willis owning the camera store and Violet, his wife, working in the camera store. You see in the census entry, there's a third person in the household, a homemaker or housekeeper, because their daughter Burl suffered from infantile paralysis and required that special care, or at least attention, and especially because Willis and his wife would then take off for a week and go to places where he would photograph and sketch and would assemble enough material that he could come back and paint it and sell those paintings. There are stories in the Gallup papers about him going with another artist to the Superstition Mountains. He spends a week at Zuni. He's a very early purchaser of what they are calling travel trailers, recreational vehicles. And one week, he and Violet are parked on the edge of the Grand Canyon, doing, collecting work there, and which they sell at the Harvey places, the hotels on the South Rim and at El Navajo and other outlets. But he fits right into the business community. He's a Shriner. He's joined the Chamber of Commerce. He's a Kiwanian. And we have this weird article from 1970 about him advocating in 1919 that there should be a McKinley County Fair. And well, what are we going to do at a McKinley County Fair besides exhibit the produce? And they're not saying, well, we could have Indian dances because, so what? But we got to get something that'll bring people in that we don't have regularly. So let's get a barnstorming pilot and sell tickets to get people to this event. But nobody buys them, so they somehow put this mule on the airplane, and they fly and they go through clouds and they claim to have gone to the moon. So that's what that astronaut is about. Anyway, Willis seems to be in the middle of promotion, and what you get is the Gallup Intertribal Ceremonial. And if he owns the camera store, well, 10,000 Indians, come on down and get your films, and you can get a picture of them. This is as early as 1923. And so he then photographs the events in the ceremonial. And let me describe what this is. When you have film, you take your roll of film into the camera store, which develops it. One of the choices you have in developing your film is to have it printed on postcard stock. And those are called real photo postcards. and you can turn your photo into something that you can mail to somebody. And so Willis will take these photographs, print 100 of them, and sell them in his store. And I came across this particular card in the an antiquarian book show that came to Albuquerque for several years, and this is the second ceremonial parade, and here you right down Cole Avenue in downtown Gallup, and the Rex Theater is right back here. What a marvelous document of Gallup history that is. And so they build a grandstand, and they build a racetrack. Early on, they were having automobile races on this racetrack. And Willis gets out and decides to photograph it. So he gets on the track. First car goes by, raises dust. So the second car that comes by doesn't see him, hits him, and he spends time in the hospital with his legs in casts. And this is a drawing that he did for his Kiwanis Club newsletter that he's saying, "I'm getting better." That's wonderful. That he had enough confidence to do that and share his plight with his fellow Kiwanians. So he gradually adds curios to his camera store, and by 1930 he's having this advertisement. He knows how to chat up the local reporters who find his story fascinating and tell about his success and his experiments in different mediums. And he participates in the social life. He goes to this squaw dance, and where you pay 10 cents to dance with somebody, and a lot of the Dene had a lot of fun getting him out to dance with them. It's one of those things you guys do out there. In the 1923 ceremonial, these are the other 3 postcards I bought at the same time I bought the parade postcard. He shows a demonstration of sand painting by a man named Hosky Yashi, which he then turns into real photo postcards. And he also publishes this print. And if you look at that caption, so there are what I call Hollywood Indians. Ordinary peoples have leaders and warriors and men and women and children and babies. Hollywood Indians have chiefs and princesses, braves and squaws and papooses, that discriminating language that is so offensive in our time. But he used that. He then turns it into a real photo postcard. But then he also starts to produce regular photo or regular postcards that are manufactured. And this picture of the Cochiti dancers at ceremonial is one of the first of them. And again, he'll go out and he'll take a photograph, and then he'll make a drawing of it. So in this period, say 1920 to 1970, postcards are in the highest part of their utilization, and Americans are buying them in great quantities. So let's talk about the Kurt Tyke Company of Chicago, which during this period was the preeminent publisher of postcards. That's a serious factory. That's 200 people may work in this building. So to do a postcard, you kind of have 5 steps. There's an artist who creates the image and the caption. There's a publisher who takes that art and puts in an order to a manufacturer who prints the order, and then either the publisher or the manufacturer, will wholesale these postcards to retail outlets, which will then sell them to the customers, the end users who write letters on them or save them as souvenirs. That business lasted till 1979. Building's still there. They turned it into loft apartments called Postcard Place. It's about 1.5 miles northwest of Wrigley Field in Chicago. When they closed, they gave their records and some of their stock to a local historical society, which in 2016 gave it to the Newberry Library of Chicago, which then has digitized the records of this company, among which were registers, ledgers, which state by state and within each volume, they organized by cities or other groupings, the orders that came in. So we know that on October 18th, 1932, Willis ordered 12,500 copies, that's that 12.5 M, of Silversmith's Daughter. And we note that he's ordering a lot of things at different times, 37, 38, and down here at the bottom, Southwest Postcards, which is a later version of his publication in 1946. So he is an active customer of the Kurt Tyke Company. So you sell postcards in places like hotels, five and dimes, drugstores, curio shops. And here's some of his postcards. Now he didn't take this photograph. This photograph of Santa Clara Pueblo is 1910, but he and the graphic arts people at Kurt Tyke inserted the colors because they can make those choices, and if the vegetables aren't bright enough, well, you just put a brighter tint in. So this glorious harvest at Santa Clara is my favorite of the Willis postcards. And then, of course, Taos Pueblo. The caption on here talks about Taos. It's not a community that anybody would believe in 1939, that they were so arrogant and independent and didn't, free of all constraints of white society, and just this fanciful, preposterous caption. And then here's another adobe hacienda, and the text: the Indians, like the Mexicans, are fond of chili, misspelled, and the red peppers are ever in evidence. on the side of their dwellings. Then there's Devil Dance of the Apache Indians. Terror, treachery, cunning are your first thoughts. Well, swell. But at least to show that he could make fun of Anglos, I offer this as to show how broad his stereotypes were. Now, as I passed through and showed how his store became a more of a curio store as well as camera store, he sells the photo business to Tom Malarkey, and the Malarkey name is on that photography store until 2004. And Malarkey also put out real photo postcards. But you'll see down here, Miami Beach, Florida. What's that all about? Well, he and his brother Linton opened an Indian curio shop in Miami Beach, Florida in 1930. And you can see that in the city directory, he and Violet are living in Miami, Florida, or that they're reported in the city directory. And in the 31 city directory, he and Violet are shown in his own house there. And what is likely to with that is that they have taken their daughter there because in April 30th, 1931, Burl dies. And this is reported in the Gallup Independent, which is the only way that we know that she had infantile paralysis from babyhood. That is the change in their life that causes them to leave Gallup. And when they come back, they move into Old Town Albuquerque, to the Casa de Armijo. And he, even though he has moved from Gallup, he retains his contacts and friendships. He regularly visits, he regularly goes to ceremonial. He brings his, his adult children and their children to visit them, to visit Gallup. But he has moved to Albuquerque, to Old Town. Casa de Armijo is on the plaza. Building's still there today. They probably lived on the second floor. This is what it looks like today. But during the time they're living there, the Works Progress Administration does a project putting up a wall around the plaza, and they're not, he paints this painting, Los Cinco Borrachos, which is in the Albuquerque Museum, which is not helpful to his relationships with the Old Town Nuevo Mexicanos. And they have a store, a curio store, probably back in the what's now called the patio market. He gets a job. Say again? No. Okay. He gets a job painting murals for the Court Cafe at 4th and Central. These are two of them that he then turns into postcards. But then he gets his WPA commission to do Gallup High School. And these depict the Spanish and American conquests of the Southwest. He begins with a globe showing Columbus's voyage to the New World, and then the epic wanderings of Cabeza de Vaca Note the three Spaniards are ragged, but Esteban, the Moor, is depicted in African tribal dress. When Kathy Flynn published her history of New Deal art in New Mexico, she cropped out the Esteban part of the Cabeza de Vaca mural. He also got a WPA commission for 3 paintings for the Alamogordo Women's Club. And as Rose mentioned, those paintings grace the newly built Gallup High School library. They built this clear story just to show those paintings. So he's being successful in Albuquerque. He builds a home in 1938 in New Mexico style, and it's important enough that the newspaper, the contractors take ads celebrating it alongside the news story that he has built, La Miradora, which is just north of the Albuquerque Country Club. And here it is more, it gets in the Albuquerque National Bank's economic new development newsletter. And here's a picture of them in 1948, Santa Fe style. Wow. And they are, and you see they are aging, but they're still productive. He has a show that he moves in September, and by November he is putting on a show, an art show at his house. And again, here's rent to own and exchange of paintings. He then builds a compound with apartments and often rents them out to fellow artists around a sunken garden. He offers that to the arts community for events. And so here's the Art Guild having a show and a tea at his home. And he and Violet are active in social activities in Albuquerque. This sort of gives you an idea of the relationship of the plaza where he lived at Casa Armijo, and his home is down here on South Rio Grande, and here's the country club. He sells his postcard business. First he incorporates, and so the imprints are now Southwest Postcard Company, but he sells the company and continues to produce postcards for a while. That company stays in business till 1971. But even as late as 1941, he's still going on the road. This is a postcard that they send to their vendors. So picture the Woolworths or in Roswell, New Mexico, and he sends a postcard saying, "I'm going to come by, bring my new stock, see how you're doing," and then he'll go make cold calls on other potential retailers. I picture them staying at the Busy Bee Cafe, which is the Roswell equivalent of the Court Cafe at the junction of the highways, going in, and they would go in and into restaurants. And I'm noting this because in 1941, he hires a high school student to be his driver, and they're tooling around southeastern New Mexico selling postcards. They're in the car listening to the radio when they hear that the Nazi Germany has invaded the Soviet Union. So that dates that. The man who told me that I met at the Historical Society of New Mexico conference. His name is John Bloom, and he's a famous historian. And he says, when I was 16, I got to be this driver and work in his postcard warehouse. So when Willis would typically, when he went into a restaurant, he would make a little drawing on a napkin and give it to the waitress and chat up with the waitress, including this stupid joke about Chief Running Water and his two sons, Hot and Cold. As I was giving this talk in the Special Collections Library a year ago, one of the members of the audience says, my mother got one of those. She worked in a paint store in Albuquerque, and here it is, and that's why I'm able to share it with you. And remember that 1916 dignified kills enemy after dark. Well, there he is in not so elegant a presentation. So he will continue to have annual open houses, music and the like, celebrating his birthday, and then finish that and then go off to Miami. In 1944, you can get a print of the painting he exhibited at the State Fair called Papoose Packing Mama, given to each visitor. Well, thanks. And thanks to his being generous with the arts community, he gets these groupies. So when he has this show, the art department of the Albuquerque Women's Club, they all get to dress up and be docents in their chino poblana and their fiesta wear and folklorico dresses. So he continues these annual events, knocking out painting, not just aspens and romantic Indians and adobe haciendas. He'll paint his garden, he'll paint his house and sell that to you. He'll paint your portrait. And when he goes off to Havana, because one of his brothers marries a woman whose parents own a perfume factory in Havana, Cuba. So you can buy seascapes and fishing boats in Havana Harbor. He gets 20 straight years of attendance at the Kiwanis Club, and they honor him for that. He's still going back to Gallup, and he does this wonderful large landscape painting that's in the Octavia Philin Library. So he never loses his Gallup connection. He also has an in presenting paintings at the Fine Arts Museum in Santa Fe and the State Fair. So, which is represented here. In 1953, there's a change in management at the museum and the board, and some people come in who think that we ought to do some modern art and not just the Cinco Pintores and the Taos 5 and the like, or the Taos Society of Artists. And so they don't pick his paintings, and he goes to the political syndicated columnist Will Harrison and says, I'm going to sue him. And he wasn't the only unhappy person. So he finally gets into the painting. So he's 80 years old, and he's in 1956, he's still doing it. Here's him doing the fishing boats in the Havana Harbor. And this is an art critic who's describing the wide variety of paintings that he does. So in 1960, he and Violet take a trip to Guaymas and Hermosillo, Mexico, and then they come back, and he tells the reporter, Well, this is probably going to be the last time I do my open house because I'm becoming blind. And so he does that show, that 1960 Thanksgiving show. On December 30th, he has a short illness and he dies. Violet lives another 10 years. And this obituary of hers is mostly about him, which is unfair because she is probably the key person in his organization. She does the parts of the work that he doesn't do. Runs the finances and the billings and the store, and is in every way a partner with him. Plus, they have these apartments, and if you owned real property in Albuquerque from 1940 to 1970, the population goes from 35,000 to 260,000. If you own real property, you prospered. So she would live a comfortable life as a widow. That when she dies, the adult children of the first marriage are the executor of the estate. They come out and they have a final show at the State Fair Art Gallery, a memorial show for Willis. And then they sell the home, which becomes a bed and breakfast. And in the 90s, the owner at the time, Robert Hanna, commissions Bart Prince to do a little addition to the inn, the bread and breakfast, which we call the Snail. And alas, it's not, at this point, it's not habitable, but it certainly is distinctive. When they nominated the house for the National Register of Historic Places, they allowed as to how that was non-conforming. This is how it looks today, and I'm appreciating the current owner of the Casas de Sueños, who generously shared some of his postcards and let me photograph the images and the like. The images of his paintings in there. I commend it to you. It's still a charming place. Right now they're having a wedding in the garden. And so it retains its Santa Fe charm, and we acknowledge Mark Cumbo, the current owner, for sharing his resources. The city names the street behind on the north side of the compound Willis Place, and so it's a one-block street, but it's fitting that we do recognize him here, because he passed by here, he prospered, he left a legacy greater than this one-block street. If you go into any antique store in the country, which has 6 shoeboxes full of old postcards, the odds are you will find a few postcards by Willis. And there are many hundreds of paintings in homes and offices in Albuquerque and beyond. And so that's J.R. Willis's story. I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Joe. And we do have some questions from the audience. The first was a question about your research method, how long it took, where you did research, and then how you solved any like seeming dead ends. If you got to a point in your research where you were confronted with a problem and where you looked to solve it.
As I mentioned at the beginning, it just growed out of the the resources we had at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, including the 1,400 postcards that of Southwest subjects that Nancy Tucker donated to create the library, the Cultural Center Libraries collection, and I wound up at the Museum of the Fine Arts, or the Library of the Fine Arts Museum in Santa Fe. They had a file, including a way to connect to Scott Peeler, the grandson who spent 3 hours on the phone with me talking about Willis. Scott assembled the genealogy that enabled this talk, and was very generous with his time, and has spoke a number of times. So having the grandson, and then the Albuquerque Museum had resources because they had 8 items in their collection. And then that same day that I presented to the Historical Society, there was a tour, a back room tour of the Center for Southwest Research at UNM. And Nancy Brown Martinez went and got me those scrapbooks from the Albuquerque Women's Club, and there's stuff in there, and then Nancy watches eBay and sends me postings on Willis stuff, and it kept growing, and people, contact a few people who still remembered him in the 80s and 90s, shared with me, John Bloom and Ellen Carlson. So that's where I got the stuff.
That's really exciting. It's exciting that there are people.
You guys too.
Yeah.
About his Gallup period.
Well, and I was just gonna say, in our research for the Gallup New Deal art project and trying to dive back and find out more about some of these artists who have been lost to history in a sense, or have just become obscure since the 1930s and 40s. J.R. Willis, I have to say, is not one, and I wonder if his proclivity or his kind of mastery of marketing, he left a pretty decent paper trail in terms of, like you mentioned, giving interviews to newspapers or placing advertisements. And so maybe, that, I don't know if that was part of his his plan to create his own legacy during his lifetime, but I think it certainly worked.
And the grandson who cared, who was him, who, whose fingerprints are in the library at the Fine Arts Museum, and in the, we had a column in the paper called Mr. Fix-It, who you could ask for things, and he posted there and said, anybody got any information about my grandfather, your artist, J.R. Willis? So, and that winds up in clipping files at the Albuquerque Public Library.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. Another question came in, if there are any books or other places to read and find out more about J.R. Willis.
Well, there's he gets a page or two in Kathy Flynn's book. I have to go back to the title, but
I think it's Treasures on New Mexico Trails. Treasures in New Mexico Trails are in the title. No.
Okay, but it's a history of New Deal art in New Mexico is the subtitle. It's in your library and several others. It's the definitive work on the subject, I think. Although there's, the group continues to do that research, and you're part of that effort.
Yes, that is true.
So the year he dies, he is interviewed by a biographer and historian named Frank Reeve, who is publishing a 3-volume history of New Mexico. Well, the first volume is the history, and the next 2 volumes are 1- and 2-page, 3-page biographies with photographs, kind of like who's who. So you get a photo and somebody interviewed him at length, and that's where we learned that, like, he claims at the time that he marries Violet in San Diego in May 19th, 1960. And Scott Peeler was unable to find that marriage record in the California resources he looked in. But that's anyway, that's probably the longest piece is in the 3-volume Frank Reed History of New Mexico set. That'll be in your reference collections, in your, probably. I'm trusting that you have it. That's the best single source so far.
No, thank you for that.
And remember, Ernie Bulow wrote in that 2014 and that monthly magazine, I guess, that there's
the Gallup Journey. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty good. He didn't realize that Willis was married though, but you can't get everything. But the couple of the illustrations that I used, the Kiwanis one of him with his broken legs is I cropped from that.
Excellent. Well, I think it's exciting, I think, for people to realize too how much original research you've done and how that's informed this presentation. I had one question that I don't know if you would want to answer or hazard a guess, but I wonder myself what you think or what you could interpret to be Willis's like primary motivation. I don't know if he was just like purely an opportunist and just totally driven by his the kind of his more entrepreneurial spirit and that side of things, or if in some senses it seems like he approached the world as, I don't like this term, but like as a fine artist and really wanted to contribute to a tradition of kind of realistic, especially landscape paintings and kind of Southwestern art. But I don't know if one dominated, if they were really balanced through his life, if it was adventure. I mean, he had a super adventurous, he traveled everywhere, as that map you showed us demonstrated. So I wonder if you want to hazard a guess of what his primary motivation was in terms of his life and career.
I don't see any separation. He's seen his opportunities and he took them. He had a talent and he used it, and he wasn't content just to do one thing. He experimented. He tried new things, and so no, it's kind of seamless. Nothing stands out for me either way.
Yeah, I think it's just, it's interesting to look back and consider the time period and what was happening in terms of the art community and art scene in New Mexico. And I think there's some examples of artists who were really committed to, like membership in the Taos Society of Artists, or there were modernists who were trying to change the approach of the Museum of Fine Arts. And there were kind of these ideological divides and battles. And to me, Willis, yeah, again, he just took advantage of it all and made it all work for him.
Well, he defended himself when they tried to invalidate him, and it was successful because apparently those modernists got removed in due course. And although these days the Fine Arts Museum certainly has this wonderful array of varieties of style and the like. But I'm the history guy. I'm not the arts guy. So
I know. Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard, and he made it maybe deliberately so hard to suss out. Because when I hear that story about him, feeling so offended and about the museum's kind of more modernist direction, I don't quite hear some of the other artists' complaints about modernism itself. And it seemed more to me that he was worried about losing kind of some kind of status within the arts community and ability to sell his work, maybe. But he was genius at that. He was a genius at making a career as an artist.
In 1953, you had to exhibit at the Fine Arts Show in order to qualify to show your work at the State Fair Art Gallery. And,
oh, I didn't realize, yeah.
Which is, so he didn't lose just one show, he lost two. And of course they sell that stuff after the show's over, and so that was a serious problem to him. And,
yeah.
And I think from reading the Will Harrison's syndicated political column, a lot of other New Mexicans didn't like that move either. They're just, they've always lived in that adobe hacienda.
Right. Change isn't easy necessarily. Well, thank you so much. I think, let me just double check that no other questions came in while we were chatting. No, just lots of compliments. People loved hearing more about Gallup history and learning about it through the lens of one of the historical characters. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share your research and your insights with us. And I want to let people know they can find out more about the Gallup New Deal Art Project at our website, galluparts.org. Again, we'd like to thank the library for co-sponsoring this event. And I don't know, Joe, if you want to leave anyone anywhere to what your next talk is, if you have one on the schedule, or if you want to give anybody a place where they can find more about what you're up to as a historian and librarian.
Well, I don't have anything scheduled. The pandemic kind of interrupted that. I am on the Speakers Bureau for both the Historical Society of New Mexico and the Albuquerque Historical Society, and so you can see the 6 talks I have in the can there.
Excellent.
And those are probably the easiest ways to get at me.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And also, everybody, we do have another talk as part of our Gallup New Deal Art Project. Molly Madakovich, an art historian, is going to join us on the 28th on Gallup Arts Facebook page live at 7 p.m. That's a Tuesday evening. So we hope you'll tune in. Thank you once again, Joe. This was wonderful, a great learning experience. And everybody who was able to catch it enjoyed it very much, and we hope that people will watch it. It'll stay up on the library's Facebook page and on the Gallup Arts Facebook page. So thank you once more, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon and evening.
Thanks for the opportunity. Good day.